Welcome back, AP Gov students. Today is Chapter 6 of Keeping the Republic, titled The Struggle for Equal Rights. If you don't know Keeping the Republic, it's fine because the content is still going to be the same. I'm going to be going over all the key terms and notes for this chapter that helped me get a 5, so I encourage you to take notes along as well. Suspect classes, groups of people that receive heightened levels of court scrutiny. These distinctions allow the court to view laws with more strictness when dealing with historically discriminated groups. The most obvious example of a suspect class would be minority races, specifically African Americans. I'm not sure about LGBTQ people or women if they're fully suspect classes on that same level. I kind of forget. However, the point of having these suspect classes is that so the court can view laws that tend to treat people differently with more strictness when it comes to these specific groups. Because, for example, if you have something like age, the differences in age, most of the time laws dealing with differences in age actually have a valid reasoning for treating people differently based on age. However, when you think about groups like African Americans versus white people, most laws that treat those two groups differently are explicitly racist and do not have like a valid reason for the law to be that way. And that's why suspect classes are created, so the court can examine laws dealing with suspect classes more closely, and that allows them to make sure that there's less discriminatory laws passed. Strict scrutiny, the highest standard of court review. This applies to the most vulnerable classifications of people in order to protect them from discriminatory laws, so the strict scrutiny is applied to court cases dealing with suspect classes. Intermediate standard review, less strict standard. It applies to less dangerous suspect classifications, specifically allowing the court to navigate how differences in a law serve the state interest or not. I'm pretty sure this is where women and LGBTQ people fall in, this intermediate area. I think LGBTQ will be heightened to suspect classes, I'm not totally sure again. However, if you think of a law that might treat women and men differently, it does make sense sometimes that laws treat them differently, and that doesn't necessarily have bad implications to it. It just means that sometimes women need certain things when it comes to the law, or men need certain things when it comes to the law. The most notable places I think where the court allows wiggle room for differences in treatment is things like divorce cases or sexual assault cases, things like that where oftentimes women have less power in the situation. Minimum rationality test, least strict standard of review. It only asks the court to consider a rational basis for a law to treat people differently. For example, back to what I said earlier, when you have something like age, it makes sense in certain laws to treat differences in ages or different people of different ages differently. Think of like the most obvious thing, like the age of consent. It makes sense why the age of consent has to be a certain age, and not everyone has the same like power under the law to give consent. Plessy v. Ferguson upheld segregation in the context of separate but equal. It served as years of precedent to unjustly allow segregation until it was eventually overturned. Plessy v. Ferguson is also what allowed the years of segregation and the Jim Crow laws to stay in place. Brown v. Board of Education outlawed segregation in public schools. It was a major win in the fight against segregation, and the Plessy ruling started the movement of segregation to be outlawed in all spheres of society. Obviously, Brown v. Board was extremely important in ending the segregation in public schools. However, it was even more important in just getting the ball rolling in restricting segregation. Brown v. Board was used as precedent to quickly annihilate all forms of segregation in all areas of life. De jure discrimination, discrimination by law. The state sometimes treats people differently under the law. It can be powerful but also easy to change and overturn. Because this form of different treatment by the state is written in the law, it's pretty easy if there is a problem with it for the court to step in or for the legislators to come in and overturn the law or change the law. De facto discrimination, inherent discrimination that cannot be tied to a specific law. It is harder to eliminate because it is often very much baked into life, society, and the world's institutions. This is where things like systemic racism and structural racism come in. When you have de facto discrimination, it is baked into all of government and all of society, so it's a lot harder than de jure discrimination to overturn because it's not just a written law that can just be changed. It's something that's in society, in the psychology of the people, so it is much harder to get rid of. Affirmative action grants direct opportunities to minorities. It is just in ensuring that discriminated groups are given opportunities, but it is also very controversial because it treats people differently based on race and or sex. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword type thing, where affirmative action is great in making sure that underprivileged groups are given opportunities, and it puts an emphasis on certain institutions to give underprivileged groups and discriminated groups opportunities. However, in order to do that, you have to specifically reach out to certain groups to give them more opportunities than other groups. The debate over affirmative action is most notable and often, raises up through the news through college applications. University of California v. Bakke outlawed affirmative action quotas. Although it still allows for race and sex to be considered in policy, it doesn't allow for direct quotas to be set. Basically, this ruling allows for colleges and other institutions to take race into account and to pass policies within the organization that promotes racial equality and racial equity. However, it doesn't allow for quotas to be set. The specific example in this case is that the University of California Med School basically set aside a certain number of application spots specifically for minorities, and that wasn't allowed because it explicitly discriminated certain groups and separated certain groups based on race. However, the university can still consider it when looking at applications and maybe analyzing how someone's social background might have affected their application. Equal Rights Amendment aimed to ban discrimination based on sex. It was never passed because it would have illegalized protections for women under the law. So although on its face it seems like the ERA not getting passed is a bad thing, however, back when the ERA was up for debate, most people actually agreed on all sides of the political aisle that the ERA shouldn't pass, because if it passed, it would prevent all the gender-based protections for men and women from being a thing, because it would violate the ERA, because it would take away all differences under the law between men and women. And like I said earlier when I was talking about suspect classes, the reason why gender isn't the highest level of scrutiny when it comes to suspect classes is because there are differences that need to be made to protect men and women in different ways, and if the ERA passed, it would prevent that. Title IX banned funds for schools practicing gender discrimination. It was a major win by disincentivizing schools from practicing gender discrimination. This would basically bar any public school from receiving funding from the states or from the national government if there was gender discrimination found. Title IX gets brought up a lot when it comes to like men and women's sports, because sometimes schools would give boys sports a whole lot of funding, it wouldn't give girls sports any funding, and that was a major part of how when Title IX was originally passed. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter, and goodbye. Yo, if you're super cool and awesome, you should follow my Twitter or X if you're that kind of person. It's at Clark4724. I post a lot of random stuff on there, but I also post channel updates and when my next videos are coming out. So if you're gonna keep watching my channel, then I recommend you follow, and thanks.